Today I'll be presenting the most used jigs in my furniture making. Jigs, also considered woodworking or workbench appliances. The four jigs are the thicknessing sled, the dovetail jig, the bench hook, and the shooting board. And I've made considerable improvements over these different jigs or appliances over the years, and I'll discuss that. I'll delve into that and give demonstrations of how I use the individual jigs in my furniture making. Hi, I'm Norman Perillo, a furniture designer and maker at Perillo Design and woodworking educator, author at WoodSkills. The first jig is the thicknessing sled. I'm giving a demonstration of how to use it. So it involves a sled that's adapted to your block plane, although you can size it up for a small smoother. And this is the actual thicknessing sled with the spacer and the track for the block plane in more detail. This is a profile view, and I set it up so I can insert it into my bench dog holes on the workbench, so it locks it in and works really well. Again, I'll continue with the demonstration. So I'm actually thicknessing this Kamiko strip down to a predetermined size, which is based on the spacer that I've inserted in below the track. So you can actually replace the spacer with a different size, different thickness spacer. And then I just move the block plane along. Make sure the wood is in the correct grain orientation when you're doing this, so the grain's rising, you don't have any tear out. And it works really well for small components. You can size this up or scale it up to a larger unit with a larger thicknessing sled for adapted to smoother planes if you wish. So I've used this extensively in my Kamiko making for thicknessing the strips down to 3/32 thickness, and it makes everything uniform right across. So the length of the sled is determined by the largest or the longest component you have. So I've sized this up to about 16 to 18 inches, this sled. So I'm checking the components now for fit. But it's an excellent way to thickness small components, and I use this, it's actually on my workbench, one of my workbenches at all times. I have two similar workbenches, and so I use this extensively in my work, in my furniture making, and Kamiko. Next is the dovetail jig. This is the dovetail jig on the side of the surface of the workbench, and this is how I would lay out the tail and the pin board. So what I'll do is I'll remove the tail board, and I'll remove the pin board and just go through the whole sequence. And you notice these are spring loaded. The cleats will move up automatically, and this helps a great deal. So it becomes a one-handed thing to adjust. And there's sandpaper attached to the inside faces of the cleats. Again, you can have larger, wider cleats on end, bulkier cleats if you work with larger components, drawer components. I don't. So this is a pre-made pin board. For example, I would do this, set that up, and then just tighten it loosely, and then use either my Shopmate so it's perfectly aligned and it's vertical. That's also another important point, is to have it flush with the surface of the dovetail jig itself. So if I needed to transfer these tails to this pin board, I would line it up and use one of these saddle squares I have, either this one. Again, this is not ideal. It works well, but you need to grip it very carefully because it's narrow, and it pivots also. This is a little more stable. This saddle square is fairly inexpensive too, so that works too. Although I would, ideally this component here would be longer. You could use that. So I've designed this saddle square for this particular jig, and also it's versatile. I can use it for other things, but this, it has a long moment, so I can set this up and that's perfectly aligned now. Here I'll remove it again and use my my more recent, a flip style saddle square. And this is just using, I created using some offcuts. It cost me nothing and I had the hinge already. So I would flip it, put it here and set it up. And there's a small faint line here so I know where the how far to go with the tails, and just I said the sandpaper helps a great deal. So once you've got it slightly tightened, you can let go of this, and not quite far enough there. So this would be accurately or precisely set in both the ends are coplanar with each other, and it's exactly perpendicular. The boards are actually perpendicular to each other in both planes and are not pivoted, and that's what this does. I can confirm that with this side, so 90 degrees and 90 degrees. So at this point I could transfer the tails. I don't have a marking knife here, but I would normally transfer the tails to the pin board and then remove them. And so I can use this dovetail jig also as demonstrated in the previous one, second to last video, on actually chopping the tails or the pins. What I would do is, for example, if I had to chop the tails, sorry, I'd line this up here. And I line this up with the base line, so I don't really need to ensure that it's square or anything, although I could check for that. Let me just remove this. But I never really have to do this because I use the baseline as an indicator on the cleat. So too far back. You can clamp it down, and then what I do is I just chop away. I usually go halfway down and then flip the board over and do the other half without actually touching the surface of the dovetail jig with a chisel. And again, this also, the dovetail jig itself protects your workbench surface, and you can also place a small board, a small thin 1/8 board underneath the tail board, and that, or pin board, and that protects it. And I'll just set up the so that's the tail board. Now if I were, the pin boards are always thicker because it's a drawer front and that's a drawer side, so I need to release that. The springs really make a difference. So I would line this up like this with the base line. Again, I could use a combination square or an engineer square. I have two of these jigs and I've been using them for 18 years now, so I think all my dovetails are created on this. So something I developed going on 20 years almost, I would say. So next is the bench hook. This is a bench hook, and I have about 3 or 4 of these now. One at every bench and a couple of extra in my earlier workbenches, so a total of 4 maybe. And I use this extensively in my work. What this allows me to do is cross-cut pieces to length. If you set it up with a stop block, you can actually create uniform sized pieces. And what it does is it creates pieces, but with very fine finish at the end. So you almost need hardly any finishing. Maybe run it through a shooting board afterwards, which I'll show you. So you can set up, it's a base with a fence, and the fence has openings in it kerfs at predetermined angles of 90 degrees or 45 degrees. And then if you flip it over, the reason there's two fences, one actually isn't a fence. They're both fences, but one serves as a cleat to hold it against the surface of the workbench. So this is an example of how the fences are set up perpendicular to the base. The fences also serve as cleats, and the next images are how it's actually attached or placed along the edge of a workbench using the same fences. Or what this allows me to do is use the bench hook to cross-cut pieces of wood to length. Now, one of the issues with, and because you can flip it over and set this side up with different angles, so you have 90, 45, but you can easily set it up at 30 degrees or 60 degrees, whatever angle is convenient. And because they're so easy to make and quick to make, you can have multiples of these. This is a unique version that I created for an article in Woodworking, in a magazine a couple of years ago, and it has openings for dogs. And the reason I have that is because if you use a bench hook against on the surface of a workbench like I'm doing here, it's hard to keep it from rocking. Really have to do multiple things: hold the wood and against the fence, and hold the fence. And so to eliminate notice some rocking. This is the piece I've just cut off, and it's very clean. You can there's actually a shine on the surface. Again, this is a very, very fine back saw that I tend to use with this, and you can see the kerf is a 32nd inch wide or something. And because it's a back saw, you're limited in the depth. Now this back saw, these fence heights are designed around this particular saw, and you can see the back saw, the folded back hits or doesn't actually hit the bottom. So that's important. If you're determining the height of the fence, you want to work with the tool or the saw you're going to use the most at that bench hook. You can always have a shorter fence, but I prefer taller fences, and I think this one's a little bit shorter. So these last a long time if you're careful with them. And what I've done here is I put a hardwood face, glued a hardwood face on the front. Now, going back to this design, what the dog holes do is allow me to lock it into place using a wooden dog. So this, again, it's all customized for your workbench, and that's the idea. So this keeps it from rocking. And lastly, the shooting board. So the shooting board itself is, for working with hand tools, really, really neat to make one of these, build one of these. They're very straightforward to make. I offer plans. Comes with it. You can create it with attachments, and that's the difference with mine. Though this is the 45. So this works. Bolting this down. So if I'm doing a 45, again, I would. So this cleans the. A little too thick. Yeah, it's 45 degree adjustment. 45 degrees. So I'll put that aside. Again, if you're building a basic one, you can use one of your existing long sole planes to use a shooting board. A more recent shooting board I'm using, and I'll show you that. This is my most recent go-to shooting board, and I'll tell you what I've done with this. This is actually one of the original shooting boards with left-hand orientation that I created for that fine woodworking article way back when. And this attachment does case miters. So yeah, this is an example of a case miter. This is 45 degrees. So this would be a small compartment, a box, a drawer. And so it's important to have the corners of 45 degrees, and that's accomplished through this attachment. So if I'm not using the attachment, I can switch it up with. So if I push this away, this would be the other attachment. I need the washer. Again, this does case miters and this does face miters. So a face miter, this is a face miter. So the idea is the same. So please subscribe to my YouTube woodworking channel, where I share more of my woodworking techniques, my woodworking philosophy, my thoughts on woodworking, and all the challenges I've experienced. And I introduce some of the new forms of woodworking I've discovered. And also visit woodskills.com, where I have a good selection of my books, both in print and digital format, on woodworking, and all my online courses, and I also offer some woodworking plans. I have maintained a regular blog on what I've got going on in my workshop and in woodworking in general. So enjoy.